Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. This is Great Big History Podcast. This is 10 Questions, Athenian Philosophy, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So, where did Athenian philosophy come from? It didn't necessarily just start with Socrates, and it doesn't end with Aristotle, but that 100 years represents something significantly different than what had come before it. And it's profoundly Athenian, and it's profoundly 5th century BC. And what it comes from is a bit of trauma. It comes from the defeat in the Peloponnesian War. It comes from how could we lose? How does the world work in which we could lose? See, philosophy isn't your head in the clouds, though we'll talk about that later, and thinking, what color would I be if I was a color? It was science. Philosophy was an understanding of how the world works. It's a science without theoretical math. See, with theoretical math, you could do physics and be like, the world moves at X amount of meters per second, and you can do the chemistry and do how many atoms are in an electron, or how many electrons are in an atom, and you could do covalence, and you could do sine and cosines. You could do all of this stuff. You can't do it when your math is letters, when your math is kind of arithmetic. When it's built really for commerce, for the buying and selling of goods, counting stuff, it doesn't work that way. And so you're limited in how you can literally explain how the world works. And so what the Greeks are going to use is logic and ethics and physics and naturalist studies. And this is how other peoples did it too. This is how the Babylonians and the Egyptians are going to study their sciences. And while they can do some math, it's a lot of logic. It's a lot of, if the world is this, then this follows. It's a lot of X then Y. P then Q. It's logic proofs from math class, from sophomore year of high school math. And what it was trying to do was explain the nature of the universe and the nature of people to understand how things worked. So, Socrates. How does Socrates feel about democracy? And democracy is going to be a big part of this philosophy. Because how you feel about democracy is going to tell you how you feel about knowledge and how you feel about people and knowledge. So how does Socrates feel about democracy? Well, we got to start with Aristophanes, because Aristophanes is his nemesis. And his nemesis is going to write several plays that just take the switch to Socrates. Aristophanes hates Socrates. And it's going to be a big deal later. He calls him the ugliest man in Athens. Socrates was famously the ugliest man in Athens. But Socrates was pro-democracy. Now, if you type in Socrates and democracy into the Google machine, you'll get, well, Plato says Socrates doesn't like democracy. Well, that's Plato putting words into a character called Socrates, his mouth. Socrates did not leave behind any writings. And so that statement, so if you get Plato says Socrates said, a lot of that is still Plato. And it's hard to differentiate Plato from Socrates, even though we do have other things Socrates said from other students. But Socrates' life, his lived experience, says, and his own philosophy says, he was pro-democracy. He fought for democratic Athens at the Peloponnesian War, and he was almost killed at the disaster of Delium in 424 BCE, or Delium. where the Athenian army was obliterated by the Thebans and murdered in huge casualties, and he was almost killed in the rout. So he fought for a democracy. That's not a guy who hates democracy. He fights in one of the biggest, bloodiest battles of the entire war. That's not a guy who hates democracy. So, what does his philosophy say? And his philosophy, again, is going to say he likes democracy. Why? Because he's going to say all knowledge is innate. All knowledge is inside of you. Everything you need to know is inside of you. You just need someone, not a teacher, not someone who will tell you. You just need someone to coax it out of you. And that's a democratic idea that everyone has equal potential. Now, what's inside of you? Not physics, not theoretical math, right? Not how many angels dance in the head of a pin. What's inside of you is moral values, moral certainties. What is love? What is honesty? What is truth? What is courage? These are the great questions. Socrates had 8 great questions. And you go, well, what is truth? And he would pull out of people go, oh, I don't know. Truth is like some weird, I don't know. And he'd be like, well, let's start with 2. Let's start with something simple, right? Let's start with, courage, right? Courage is difficult, but, is it courageous to risk your life? Well, yeah, it is, right? And then you build from that. You do leading questions where every question gets you to an answer, which gets you to the next question. This is what we do in class. I never ask you a question you cannot answer if you honestly just thought about it. If you went, okay, if you weren't scared, you would be wrong. If you just kind of went, okay, where's the question going? It's there. I know this. It's inside of me. These are a series of leading questions called the Socratic method. That every question, it's like, how do you get to 4? Well, you go 2, and then you add 2, and that gets you to 4. Well, how do you get to 8? Well, you go 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 8. That's not new. That's not anything, that's hardly cosines and sines and square roots. That's just 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. Get you to 4. Get you to 8. It's easy. And that's the Socratic method. So it's the idea that you know everything. You know truth. You know honesty. You know courage. You know the right way to act. It's inside of you. You just need someone to help bring it out of you. You think you're ignorant, but you're not. You have the same potential as everybody else. Ignorant people, notice they're not stupid. They're not dumb. Ignorant people just reject knowledge for the safety of the familiar. This is the shadows of the cave analogy, where the people are watching these shadows cast onto the wall of a cave. And in comes Socrates, and he takes them outside, and while they were in the cave, they saw the image of a tree. He takes them outside, and he shows them a tree. And the people go, no, and they run back inside and start looking at the shadows again. Why? Because it's familiar. It's comfortable. They don't want to be challenged. They know what they know, and they're safe in their knowledge. And in comes Socrates to be like, but there's a whole other stuff you can learn. And people go, no, I don't want that. Because if I know more stuff, now if there's a tree outside, I have to change. I have to be outside. I can't be with my pillows watching the cave wall. I have to be outside. And now I have to be in the grass. I have to listen to the birds. I have to, it may be a more real experience, but it's a more complicated one too. And it's not as safe. It's not as familiar. So Socrates' argument is people aren't dumb. They just haven't been exposed to the truth. So what happens to Socrates? Well, he's murdered. He's murdered by democratic Athens for, quote, corrupting the youth with his gross un-Athenian ideas. His students went home, told their parents, hey, this is what I learned today. And the parents freaked out. Does that sound familiar in 2022, 2023 America? It should. Because we just had elections in which this was a major issue. What are teachers teaching? We have to control what teachers are teaching. Oh, they're so gross. Oh, that's not American. Oh, they did that to Socrates. Democratic Athens had a trial. They had 500 jurors. Everybody wanted to be on this jury. They found him guilty of treason to the state, of corrupting the youth, of being a groomer. Now, Plato's going to tell you he was a groomer for truth in the face of ignorance. He was going to tell you he was a groomer for honesty in the face of lies. Of independence instead of slavery. Right? He's trying to set people free in their thoughts rather than being dependent on other people, on their parents, on, quote, smart people. So the death of Socrates, which is in our video, famously painted by Jacques-Louis David in 1787, which is today hanging in the New York City Metropolitan Museum. Please go and see it. It is stunning. Is him giving his last lecture. He drinks the poison. He's been sentenced to death. And rather than being like executed, like having your head cut off, the Athenian state and lots of Greek states did the same thing. They're like, take care of your stuff. And then, in a manly way, kill yourself. You're a traitor. We are going to kill you. Just if you do it on your own time, on your own schedule, and we don't have to drag you through the streets kicking and screaming, that's the manlier way to go. So just do that. And that's what he's doing. He's giving his last lecture. And in the painting, he's, give me the hemlock, give me the poison. It's time to go. Here's my last lecture. And there's Plato, who loves Socrates as an old man at the end of the table, at the end of the bed, in the gray. That's Plato. And so there's an argument that this painting is a memory. It's not actual. It's Plato as an old man remembering the death of his teacher, of his mentor, of his friend. That's why Plato is facing away from the events and not looking at them. It's coming out of the back of his mind. And Plato is going to have some thoughts on democracy. And he is going to portray Socrates' death as ignorance and fear trying to destroy truth. And we see these fights today with the arguments over LGBTQ stories or books in libraries, and people going, oh, there's lesbian sequences in Anne Frank's book. We got to get rid of Anne Frank's book. Oh, there's all of this nudity in these Holocaust stories or movies. We got to cut them out. We got to get rid of them. Right? We can't have anything, any knowledge that isn't safe, that we don't approve of, because our students might be made to feel upset, and we can't let them be upset by knowledge. Well, Plato's like, no, truth is upsetting. Truth is offending. Truth is difficult. It's truth. If life was easy, we wouldn't need a concept called truth, because there would be no concept opposite of truth. So Plato is going to have thoughts on democracy. So what's Plato's thoughts on democracy? Well, he hates democracy. It murdered Socrates. People dumb and they're ignorant. And the mob which murdered Socrates is motivated by its base emotions. Notice in the arguments against teaching trans or against talking about LGBT life or history or studies or even that gay people exist. It's you're a groomer. You're trying to make people into gay people. You're trying to be a pedophile or a pederast. It's base emotions. It's fear. It's anger. It's disgust. And the idea is the mob gets its way because they are the loudest group, because ordinary people don't fight against them. That they go, oh, these are a bunch of nutcases. This isn't so bad. And then the mob gets its way. And then it wins. And so for Plato, democracy doesn't work because the regular folk don't participate in it to save it. And so democracy is always being taken over by the loudest, dumbest, most angriest parts. So it doesn't work. And he's going to write a book called The Republic. Now, this is not the Roman Republic. This isn't the American Republic. It's a republic as in not a monarchy. And his argument is government should be run by smart people. It should just be run by smart people, by educated people. Not by those who are elected, not that by those who play to the crowds. It should be run by the objectively smart. And if those smart people happen to be women, so be it. That this is kind of the first feminist work in the Western canon. Well, other than Lysistrata, I suppose, because it includes women as an equal to men, as having a political role, as having an intellectual role, as having an educational role, and having potential equal to men. So it's a feminist work. For Plato, who doesn't like people. And so if you're looking at our video, we have Plato doing his studies, he's the man in the gray, and he's teaching. He's a teacher now. Notice it's not just someone, he's going to teach, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But Blazing Saddles has this kind of thing. We have this GIF, and it's the character talking to the sheriff, and the sheriff's an African American man, and he's come to town, this Western town, and he's run into racism. Right, the town is full of racists, and this African American sheriff is kind of despondent, and in comes the drunk gunslinger, who goes, "Come on, what did you expect? You coming in? What did you expect? These are the people of the land, the common clay of the West. You know." And that is Plato to a T. The ordinary person is dumb and ignorant and of little political value. They're not lions, they're sheep. They're just too ignorant to know that they're sheep. So then, what's Plato's thoughts on knowledge then? All right. So obviously it's not going to be democratic. It's not going to be inside of you. It's not going to be your potential. It's definitely not that. So if it's not inside of you, where is it? And for Plato, people are dumb, so they don't have access to knowledge. They don't even have it. It's not even around them. So where is it? It's in the ether. Knowledge is located in the ether, E-T-H-E-R. And what is ether? It is a faraway place you can't touch, taste, or experience. It's a faraway place you can't touch, taste, or experience. You can't go there. You can't know what's there. So then how do you learn? Well, you need someone smarter than you to tell you right and wrong, true from false. You need a teacher who's going to tell you what a triangle looks like and what a circle looks like. And if the teacher says, draw a circle, and you draw a triangle, they will mark you wrong, and they will penalize you. They will fail you on your shapes. And when your parents come in to talk to the teacher about how well you're doing, your teacher's going to say, I don't know. They don't know their shapes. What are you teaching them at home? You're being a bad parent because you're not teaching them the right answers. They think a circle is a triangle. Well, who determined that? How does the teacher know what a circle is supposed to look like, what a triangle is, and why they're different? Well, the teacher knows because someone smarter than them told them. And what about that person? Well, someone smarter than them told them. And what about them? Well, it goes back all the way to the beginning of time. Someone smarter than the person tells them what the answer is. But that means at the beginning of knowledge must be some smart person through revelation jacked into, like Neo, into the matrix, into the ether, who downloads what the shapes are. And so when someone draws a triangle and says, that's a circle, they say, wrong. A circle looks like this, and then draws a circle and says, that is a circle. And the person goes, how do you know? And they go, because I am smarter than you, and I am jacked into the ether. There's this famous song by Harry Chapin, the guy who does Cats in the Cradle, called Flowers Are Red. And it's this little poem story about a boy who goes to school. And the boy goes to school, and they have an assignment, which is draw flowers, draw grass and flowers and the sun. And the little boy said, there are so many colors in the rainbow, so many colors in the morning sun, so many colors in the flower, and I see every one. And the teacher looks at this and says, you're sassy. There's ways that things should be, and you'll paint flowers the way they are, so repeat after me. And she said, flowers are red, young man, and green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they've always have been seen. Now, Harry Chapin, being the 70s hippie, is writing about how education stamps out, the idea that education stamps out individuality. It stamps out creativity. That modern education, because it's so standardized, that there's no room for creativity. And so what this teacher is doing is not teaching the student red and green or yellow or what flowers look like or how to paint grass and the sun. What the teacher is teaching them is how to obey. In my class, flowers are red, grass is green, the sun is yellow, and that's the way you're going to paint them. That's the way you're going to draw them. And so that when the student, and you should listen to the song, it's a good song, when the student goes to another school and they have the same assignment, he paints red for the flowers and green for the grass and yellow for the sun, and the teacher goes, why? And the student says, because flowers are red and green leaves are green, and there's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they've always been seen. The idea is that the teacher has impressed upon this knowledge, and that's a bad thing for Harry Chapin, because people should be exploring and people should find their own knowledge. But for Plato, you can't trust people. People are dumb. People are idiots. They are, as Blazing Saddles teaches us, morons. They can't be trusted with themselves. So you need someone smarter to tell you what right and wrong are, what true and false is. Now, what's in the ether? What's there? What's located there? And that is the Platonic ideal. That's not just anything. It is the perfect form of the thing that exists in the ether. So the perfect circle, the perfect triangle. And you go, oh, I've seen a perfect circle. No, you haven't. You have not. Because such a thing can't exist in nature. Why? Because no matter what you do, you are flawed. And the instruments the person uses to make that perfect circle are flawed. And they're made by people who are flawed. So the imperfections may be less, but they're still imperfections. A circle is a continuous line where every point on it is equidistant from every other point. Humans cannot do that. They could just make one that looks closer to what you think a circle should look like. Like if you close your eyes and you think of a circle, what do you think of? And then draw it. Try it. Take out a piece of paper and take a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Think of a circle and now draw it on your piece of paper. How well did you do? How much does that circle? Did you have to stop? Does it have some junk in the trunk? Does it have a hair lip that kind of goes over, a comb over? Do you have a comb over circle? Did you draw it too small? Do you have to make it bigger? Take up the entire page? How well does that look? Does it look like what you saw in your head? And so the question is, where does that image in your head come from? It's got to exist somewhere. To Plato, nothing that exists, even in your imagination, can come from nothing. It has to exist somewhere. Because nothing can come from, something cannot come from nothing. Something must come from something. So it must exist somewhere. And if it doesn't exist here, right now, then it must exist in the ether as an image that everything strives to be. Now that should sound familiar. That's a place. The ether is a place, a faraway place that you can't taste, touch, or experience, where everything is perfect. That should sound familiar to you. Because that's what St. Augustine is going to use. St. Augustine, in his book, City of God, is going to use Platonic philosophy to explain heaven. He's going to invent your concept of heaven. Jesus doesn't do that. Even St. Paul doesn't do that. St. Augustine does. So who is St. Augustine? St. Augustine is a bishop. He's a philosopher in the 400s AD. He's 700 years after Plato. And he writes his book, City of God. Why? Because the Roman Empire was collapsing to the invasions of the Goths, to the Germans, to the Vandals. The Goths had even sacked Rome in 410. Now, the Romans studied Greek philosophy, and when we get to our Romans chapter, we'll talk about this. But the Romans had studied Greek philosophy, and so people came to Augustine and said, Augustine, what are we supposed to do? Rome is falling. And he said, don't worry about it. Your job as a Christian is to get to heaven. And they said, well, what is heaven like? And he said, well, did you study your Romans? And they said, did you study your Greeks? And they said, yes. And they said, did you study your Plato? And they said, of course, we're Roman. Of course we studied our Greeks and we studied our Plato. And he says, you know how Plato has the ether? And he said, yes. He said, that's heaven. And he said, really? But Plato was a pagan. And they said, that's not the problem. If he was a Christian, he'd have called it heaven. A place we can't go to in life where everything is perfect. And so for him, it was a perfect place that looks like, as a Roman, a perfect Rome that is run by a perfect emperor. That's Jehovah. That's God with Jesus. This is the idea that Jesus is perfect, that Jehovah is perfect. Well, Jesus isn't perfect. Jesus gets mad. Jesus says mean things. Right? Jesus isn't perfect. Jesus is a human and a God. If you know your catechism, he's 100% God and 100% human. So he's going to mess up sometimes. That's okay. Right? And if you read your Old Testament, Jehovah's always making mistakes. He's always trusting people who do bad things. It just comes with learning to be God. It's the Christians who make Jehovah perfect. Well, that's St. Augustine. He's a perfect emperor because that's Platonic. So the modern concept of heaven as a perfect place, see our little GIF, which is Homer is like, oh, it's a land made of chocolate where you can eat everything. It's all chocolate all the time. Everything's made out of chocolate. That's heaven. It's a place where puppies are always puppies. Where if you're a golfer, the tee time is always 7 a.m., but the temperature is always low. And the sun is just in the right position. Think about your concept of heaven. What's your concept of heaven? It's good. Dante's heaven, Dante's Paradiso is 7 layers of goodness, which is why no one reads it, because it's boring. It's like 7 layers of goodness. On the lowest layer, on layer 7, you have marshmallows. On layer 6, you have graham crackers. On layer 5, you have chocolate. On layer 4, you have s'mores. Oh, see, it's always a little bit better, right? As you go up. So the layer above that is s'mores with cinnamon. I don't know what's better than a s'more. You have to tell me. But that's St. Augustine using Plato. So Plato doesn't like you, doesn't like people. He thinks people are dumb, not ignorant, dumb. And so they have to be told what real knowledge is. Well, what does Aristotle think about this? What does Aristotle think of Plato's philosophy? Well, he hated it. He broke up with Plato and Plato's school. He went out on his own. And there's Plato's quote about this to his students. Where, Plato, where's Aristotle? Oh, Aristotle has kicked us off, just as chickens do to their mother after they've been hatched. Well, Plato held a grudge, right? Aristotle is beyond us now. He's left us. He thinks he's better than us. He's like a teenager off on his own, right? He doesn't need us anymore. But Aristotle believed not in the perfect, but in the right, in the correct. So he thought of things, good things, as composed of good necessary ingredients, rather than there is a perfect play, which I think Plato believes is Oedipus Rex, and that all plays should try to be Oedipus Rex. Aristotle says good plays must have ingredients: anagnorisis, peripeteia, catharsis. Catharsis is where the audience has an emotional reaction to the play that they're watching. The audience, when they go into a play, knows it's fake, knows they're hearing a story, knows they're hearing fiction. But if they cry, like in Toy Story 3, when they all hold hands in the furnace, and they all hold hands because the time is coming that, ooh, it looks like it's bad. Or if you watch the first 10 minutes of Up, and the adults are crying, and the little kids are like, what's going on with all the adults? Why are they all crying? That's catharsis, that you have an emotional reaction to something you know is fake. I know Toy Story 3 isn't real. I know those toys aren't real. Still, you feel bad. I know these two characters in Up, the husband and the wife, aren't real, and yet you cry, you tear up when she dies. He's going to write on government and politics, that what it needs is morality and ethics and selflessness and community. That you need ingredients to have good government, that there is no perfect government. There's no perfect Rome. There's good Rome made out of good things, a good emperor, a good senate, a good army, loyal citizens, fair taxes, that type of thing. That's what Aristotle's talking about. So then where does Aristotle think knowledge? What does Aristotle think about knowledge? Where does it come from? Well, you could find it yourself. Unlike Socrates' knowledge was inside of you, and you can't access, like you cannot reach into yourself and pull it out. You need someone to help you, but it's still in there. Plato thought it was so far away from you, you needed someone to tell you what it is. For Aristotle, it's everywhere around you. It's located in nature. You have to go out, you have to contemplate, you have to observe, not experiment. Experiment is modern. That's where you manipulate nature. No. For Aristotle, you observe nature. You want to know how a river works? Go look at a river. This is what my grad school friends who were anthropologists did. They went off to Kenya, lived in the jungles of Kenya for 6 months, and watched monkeys and gorillas and chimpanzees and bonobos be monkeys and gorillas and bonobos. They just watched them and they recorded it down. They didn't hang out with them. They didn't drug them and take them to a zoo and then study them. They just hung out in the jungle observing. That's Aristotelian. Now, you can make the argument, as Margaret Mead did, that the very act of observing changes the behavior of the observed, but that's all right. We're not yet into science. We're 2,000 years away from science. So right now, just you go and observe it. You go and you do it. So people were ignorant, like Socrates thought. They weren't dumb. They weren't stupid. They could know knowledge. So then why don't they know knowledge? Why are they ignorant? It's because they don't observe the world. Ignorance is a choice. They are choosing to not go investigate the river. They are choosing not to know. So ignorance is a choice. They don't get the library card and take anything out of the library. They don't go to Wikipedia and read different entries and articles. They don't get a passport and get on a plane and go to Canada just to see something different. They don't get out of their bubble. So then what do teachers do? Do we have teachers? Socrates did not have teachers, while for Plato, teachers were the authority on knowledge. Well, Aristotle, like pretty much everything, mixes the two, mixes Socrates with Plato. Teaching is helping students learn how to access knowledge, not what the knowledge was. So famously, he tutored Alexander. Philip II said, "Who's the smartest man in the whole wide world?" And everybody kind of went, "Aristotle is," right? So Plato had been dead by this point. So Philip II calls him up, says, "Aristotle, I want you to come up to Macedon." And Aristotle goes, "That's a far away. And Philip II says, "Well, I'm kind of king of the world, and how about I pay you a lot of money?" And Aristotle says, "Yeah, I could do that." And so he comes up and he tutors Alexander and the leading Macedonian nobles. And there's like 3 kings, future kings in this class that he's going to have. And the idea wasn't, this is knowledge. See, Alexander had that from other teachers. He had Platonic teachers and he hated them. And Aristotle's more like, no, you're a king. You're going to be a king. So if you want to know how to be a good king, you got to go and observe good kings. You got to go and see, follow your father around. He's the best military guy of the age. You should kind of be in his army. You should do things that show you what works and what doesn't work. And Alexander liked Aristotle. Whereas he sent gag gifts or revenge gifts to his other teachers, he sent esteemed gifts back to Aristotle. Now you have to imagine being Aristotle. Aristotle has retired. He's doing his things. He's writing his little memoirs. He's doing his studies. And all of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. Knock, 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 knock. And you open it up, and there's these Macedonians or Greeks with like boxes upon boxes upon boxes. And they're like, "Alexander sends his regards. Here's a note." He opens it up, and it's like, "I hope you can use this stuff." And they open up the boxes, and it's the plants and animals of Asia. It is everything Alexander has seen that no European had seen before. And so he sent it back. He collected it as a scientific thing and sent it back to Aristotle and said, "Tell us what this is. Tell us what it does. You're the man." And that's a huge amount of trust. They hunted animals. They killed them, stuffed them. I don't know really what they did, but they sent them back too. Here, or live animals, they sent them back. For Aristotle, here's a badger. But, the idea was, I want to help you know everything about the world. I have discovered all of this stuff. I'm sending it back to you. That is really and esteem between the world conqueror Alexander the Great and his tutor. The tutor didn't tell him what he needed to know, didn't tell him this is how to be a great king. He said, these are the ingredients. And you have to work at them, and you should observe them, try to find them in other people, but then do them. So what did Aristotle think of democracy? Well, it could work. It probably won't work. Why? Well, because democracy relies on people. If people are good and smart and open to new ideas and they're moral, then democracy can work. But most people are tired and they're weak and they're ignorant and they're selfish. Remember, good ingredients make good things? Well, good people make good governments. Bad people make bad governments. And if there's a saying, right, for evil to succeed, it only requires a good man to do nothing. Well, that's kind of Aristotle, right? Bad people will make bad governments because bad people will make government work for them instead of for everybody. And there's a famous statement from Aristotle that man is a political animal. And they're like, oh, that's like Darwinian, right? And later on, people will take it as Darwinian, like you use politics to destroy your enemies. That's not what he meant. It's that people live together. So they have to limit their behaviors. Everything a person does is political. Everything I do is diplomatic and political. I say hello to my neighbor. I'm being political. I want my neighbor to like me. I don't want him to dislike me. I want our barrier between us, our fence, to get along. We don't, want to have problems. Right? So you have to live together. So you have to limit your behaviors, but at the same time you're limiting your behavior, you have to strive to reach your potential within the community. So you have to strive to be the best person within the community you can be, while at the same time not hurting other people while you do it. Why don't I park in front of my neighbor's mailbox? I could. I'm an individual. I'm independent. I can make my own decisions. I'm a man. Why have I never parked in front of their mailbox? Because that would stop them from getting their mail. I could do it. I have the power to do it. I don't do it. Why? Because it would make my neighbor's life worse. So I limit my behavior. I park in a different place. So I have to strive to reach my potential by not being everything all the time. I have to strive for my potential while also living within the limits of community, of living with other people. So is Aristotle important? And the answer is yes. Heck yeah, he is. Because the Romans in the Middle Ages are going to think he's the smartest person who ever lived. Alexander thought he was the smartest person who ever lived. His words were the right answer in any intellectual dispute. And you see this in the Middle Ages. You see, and the philosopher. And when you see the philosopher said, it's Aristotle, right? He's just the philosopher, right? The philosopher said, and if the philosopher said it, he was right, and you were wrong if you were arguing with him. Which meant that by the 1500s, modern science and the scientific method had to be invented in order to prove Aristotle wrong. Aristotle was considered so correct that science had to be 100% verifiably right. Right? If I go into my science class, right, and I do chemistry, and I do follow the formula, I do the scientific method, I do steps 1 through 10, I will always get the same result 100% of the time. Because if I don't, it's not science. It's magic. It's something else. It's a mistake. Science had to be science because people wouldn't believe it any other way. And you will go, well, why? Well, think if some nerd told you everything you know is wrong. Aristotle spoke about everything, and then people wrote about the things he didn't write about using him to justify it. So imagine someone told you that black is white and up is down and short is long. You'd be like, you're an idiot. Well, that's what science was saying. Aristotle said the earth was the center of your universe. Just look up the sky. Look at how the stars turn. They turn around you. Obviously, we're the center of the universe. Science is saying no. Not only are we not the center of the universe, we're not the center of the solar system, we're not the center of the galaxy. We're like unimportant in the grand scheme of where Earth is located. Who's going to believe that? You're telling me that the Lord God, the creator of the universe, invented his most prized creation, humans, put them on his most prized landmass, the earth, and then put that in the middle of nowhere in his universe? Come on. What God would do that? And yet, science is saying, well, that's where we are. We're a speck of dust in an unimportant solar system on an unimportant arm of an unimportant galaxy. Far from everything. So you'd be right to be like, you're making that up. It can't be true. And if Aristotle said the earth was the center of the universe, you have a reason to be like, well, Aristotle, who is smart, what, Aristotle's wrong about everything? This is why people have problems with the Bible. Because they're like, wait, the Bible can't be wrong on this one thing, because if it's wrong on this one thing, it might be wrong about everything. And if it's wrong about everything, then what am I supposed to base my beliefs on? Are my beliefs wrong too? Is there no Jesus? Is there no God? Like, if it's wrong about one thing, could it be wrong about everything? And that's what science, modern science, was dealing with in the 1500s. Take my 102 class for how this turns out. But that's how important Aristotle was. Aristotle became the foundation of just knowledge, of intellectual knowledge, more than Plato. Plato has his role. Plato is considered important too. But Aristotle is like the foundation of knowledge. Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And you could see how each one feeds into the next one and how trauma feeds, right? Socrates' trauma of losing the Peloponnesian War, of Plato's trauma of losing to murder Socrates, and Aristotle's trauma of having to break up with Plato and saying the smartest man in the world is wrong. And he's going to have to find a whole new philosophy. You could imagine Plato says Aristotle's wrong. All of Plato's students say Aristotle's wrong, right? And since Plato is the biggest teacher of the time, you're talking about all educated people telling you you're wrong. That's a trauma as well. Because I'm sure Aristotle's sitting there with his wife going, am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong, but am I wrong? Is Plato right? He had to have thought that. So that's a trauma. That's a stress. So be safe, take care, and in our next lecture, we do the Romans.